All right, well, welcome to the iWest seminar series. My name is Andrea Maestas. I'm part of the iWest team at Los Alamos National Lab, and I'll be your host for today. I'll start with a brief introduction to iWest for anyone who might be joining us for the first time. iWest is an initiative funded by the U.S. Department of Energy to provide communities across 6 Intermountain West states with data, tools, and information for energy transition planning. iWest takes a place-based approach, which frames everything we do in the context of geographical, environmental, and demographic attributes of the Intermountain West region. And we also take a technology-neutral approach that explores energy options and opportunities across numerous symbiotic energy economies. Those technologies are assessed in tandem with societal readiness, which we believe is key to ensuring an equitable energy transition. And those assessments are all done through community engagement and coalition building to encourage regional partnerships. We're really excited to have Noah Eckert with us today. He's going to be telling us about a new solar project that's being deployed in the Four Corners region. Noah is a director of project management and development at DESRI Renewable Investments. He works with internal and external stakeholders to develop projects from the financing stage all the way through operations. And Noah has been in this business for about 15 years, standing up projects all over or across the country. So I'm just so excited to have Noah here. And with that, I'll hand it over to him.
Fantastic. Andrea, thank you so much for the introduction. Thanks to the iWest team and the community here for the opportunity to join you guys today and tell the story from my perspective, from DESRI or DESRI's perspective and the experience over the last couple of years. I see a few familiar names, faces out there. Can everybody hear me okay before I dive in?
You're good, Noah. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I've prepared, I don't know, about 15 to 20 slides today to talk about, set the table a little bit just to give you guys an introduction into DESRI and who we are and what we're doing, a little bit about the legacy and history of San Juan, the policy environment that we're working in, and then, spend most of the time talking about the project, and then a little bit about, what comes next and what we can learn from projects like this as we go forward in the energy transition. Next slide. Yeah, I'll just spend a quick 30 seconds here. So just to give to lay out what I'm going to talk about. Introduction, essentially what I just talked about. And I'll spend a little bit of time on the market and some of the challenges. It's been a very challenging operating environment over the last couple of years. And then I think one part I missed was the just engagement in the stakeholders, the number of folks involved in trying to make a project like this, successful is pretty significant, as you'll see as we go. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not going to read through the bullets line by line here, but DESRI Renewable Investments, DESRI for short, was founded in 2010, and the intent was really to focus on renewable investments, whether that be wind or solar. Those were the two main focuses at the time. Battery energy storage is now, coming to the market and becoming a more mainstream technology, and a necessary one, given that solar and wind are variable technologies, which is different than, coal and gas and conventional generation or thermal generation that I think is classically called baseload, which is very reliable and operates, roughly 24/7. So we as a company, we focus around the country. We operate in most states. I think from a marketing perspective, we're one of the top 5 independent power producers. So DESRI, what I think is really interesting about our approach is, starting with a financing background and being part of DE Shaw as a fund, we focus on the development, the design, and then the construction, financing, and the operation of these projects. So in the market, there's a lot of different players. Utilities, I think, are probably some of the most common, but for those of us who are not actual utility players and working to build these projects and sell the power or the projects to utilities or others, having the ability to not only start it from the beginning, in this case, as I'll talk about, we acquired it partially through the development process, but then we pull it all together, we build it, and then we own and operate it for the life of the project. So not only does it give us a view on the broad risks and the values, but it also gives us a good insight and lens into the communities we operate in and the fact that we're a long-term investor and partner in those regions. Next slide, please. So just a visual to give you guys a sense. And just for some context, that last slide says we have over 8 gigawatts of contracts for mostly solar, some battery, some wind. But here's the way it breaks out across the country. I think our presence is heaviest in the Southwest and the West, and then the Midwest. You can see the light green, that's predominantly in solar, but we do have some wind assets. And then the gray stuff you're seeing there is we're starting now to begin pairing solar and storage together, and in some cases, wind. You can go to the next slide. Okay. So now with a little bit of background on DE Shaw Renewable Investments, San Juan Generating Station. So obviously this plant has been a cornerstone for the Four Corners region in terms of providing power for the region, but also more broadly in the West. It was built in 1973, 4 units, roughly 1,600 plus megawatts, so a very large plant, very important part of providing power, to the region and to the West. As the energy transition has moved, both on the federal front in terms of policy and then state, which I'll talk about on the next slide, coal has been a very important part of building the economy over the years. But as we have moved forward, we've seen both the cost of it get higher, not only from a price perspective, but from an environmental perspective as well. So coal has been aging out just in terms of how these plants have been built and the time they've been in operation, and then all the larger shifts as we fight climate change. So part of the retirement process of San Juan Generating Station started in 2017 when PNM, started working on their IRP and started, putting a roadmap together to figure out what the right path was to begin to transition coal and these conventional resources off the grid and start bringing on new resources. So as part of that, they launched an RFP in 2020. The developer of the San Juan Solar project was a company by the name of Photosol, and they had started developing this project back in 2017. So as you'll see as we walk through this, these projects take anywhere from 5 to 8 years, I think, from inception to actually getting to a place where you're online and generating electricity and having a useful asset on the grid. So the 2 key points on this slide are, PNM went out to the market in 2020 to start soliciting for replacement resources. This project was one that bid into it. And as part of that planning, it was planned to have the coal plant come offline in 2022. Next slide, please. So part of what drove that, as I talked about, was federal. The 2017 to 2020, there had been the ITC and the PTC for many years, which had been helping drive the growth of renewables and get those industries moving. So a lot of that was in process. You had, higher operating costs. You had a number of factors. And then in New Mexico in particular, there was the Energy Transition Act of 2019, which set the standard for 50% of renewable or zero carbon resources that the utilities, in this case, investor-owned utilities, had to be invested in and operating by 2030. So that was part of what was driving PNM's decision making and moves in terms of its fleet. And then a new coal emission standard that started this year. And then on the federal side, I'm sure everyone is well aware in this community of the IRA and a really good benefit that came out of the IRA. There's still several pieces of it that are being determined in terms of how they get implemented, domestic content being one piece of it. But one thing that was very helpful for San Juan and other coal communities around the country is this 10% added or bonus adder that is tied to solar projects that can be sited adjacent to. So whether they're either in the same census tract or an adjacent census tract to a retiring coal plant. And that coal plant had to be retired after 2009. So plants prior to that don't qualify for the credit. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's a little bit about the both state and federal level policy. There's a lot of factors going on that are driving the transition, and we certainly applaud, are very excited about the steps New Mexico has been taking. The Energy Transition Act of 2019, has really helped spur development. And I think you can see, if you look at this graph, the interconnection queue is, it's like the gatekeeper to the grid, essentially. So there's a lot of different pieces you have to pull together for a project, but unless you have a interconnection agreement, you can't plug into the grid and deliver electricity to be used by customers. So as solar has grown, specifically, you'll see the yellow graph higher, but wind is but storage and solar are really the two big stories here. The cost of both coming down significantly, solar coming down much more quickly, but it's also been in the market, for 10 years longer than storage has been. So one of the things that Photosol had to do early on was to secure land and then get in the interconnection queue. And as you can see, since 2014, we've gone from less than 100 megawatts or gigawatts in the queue, and this is around the country, so not specific to PNM. But I think you can take this and you can make this a microcosm across most utilities or RTOs. But the growth has been logarithmic or geometric in this case. It's just been staggering. So having a interconnection application submitted in 2017 set the project up to be able to successfully bid into the 2020 RFP. And that first LGIA was signed in 2021. And then I'll get into more detail, but as part of this process over the last year and a half, we had to go back and do some amendments and restate some pieces as the landscape has changed. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's San Juan Solar 1. So in the left-hand part of the image there, well, for everybody looking in the top left there, you can see we're just outside northwest of Farmington, New Mexico, just north of Kirtland, which is in the Four Corners region, which is where San Juan Generating Station is located. The plant was, as I mentioned, was retired the end of 2022, as was the coal mine associated with supplying coal to that plant. Basically, the bid that was put in for San Juan Solar 1 was a 200 megawatt AC solar project with 100 megawatts of batteries or 400 megawatt hours. It's a 4-hour duration battery. You can see there looks like the little blue line, squiggly line that goes from the PNM substation that's starred there up to the footprint of the project is a 345 kV transmission line or gen-tie line. That plugs into existing infrastructure at the San Juan plant. And I'm just going to spend a little bit of time here because I think this is one of the interesting pieces and values of a project like this. So when the bid was originally put in 2020, the idea was to connect the project to the existing PNM substation. As more and more people entered the queue and the studies were being done, it was determined in order to not only provide access for San Juan 1, but the interconnecting utility P&M in this case has to also look at others in the queue and determine what upgrades are going to be needed for others who want to plug into this spot. So we could spend an entire talk on interconnection. It's very complicated, and it's one of the more challenging pieces of the industry. But one of the amendments that had to happen is instead of connecting directly into the substation, which was the initial plan, was to build an expansion or an extension of that. And then that included upgrades that were required to be able to take on the amount of power, not only for San Juan 1, but future projects that would be potentially coming online. And this project is sort of one of two parts. The interconnection agreement is a 400 megawatt interconnection agreement. So it gives us the rights to put 400 megawatts on the grid. This project is contracted at 200. So there's another 200 that could come online later. I can get to that at the end of the talk. But that was one of the key pieces. The other, of course, was schedule. All of the 2020 projects were meant to be put in service in 2022. And that was to coincide with the retirement of San Juan of the coal plant. So let's move to let me make one more statement. So 20-year power purchase agreement, both for the solar and the storage here. It's a 7-mile tie line. As I said, 345 kV is the voltage. So there's two big transformers where it says shared project substation and battery storage, where basically everything gets plugged in there, and then it's stepped up to 345 kV, and it runs down that what I call an extension cord, essentially from the solar project, and plugs into the to the grid there at the P&M substation. And through this whole path, we have both federal. There's a lot of BLM land that we traverse. There's land that is and property or has constraints with the coal mining activity that happened. There's a lot of other power lines in the area, as well as state land and private land. So truly, every sort of stakeholder you can think of from a real estate perspective involved. Next slide, please. Okay. So part of the story I want to tell over the next couple of slides is between 2020 and where we are today in 2023. I think no one could have foreseen the COVID pandemic. So that's one. The solar industry, for those who aren't closely familiar, I've been in it for 15 years. I think 5 years into that tenure, so this would have been in the 2010 to 13 sort of time frame. China has taken a very dominant role on polysilicon and producing panels, and really become the major supplier. I mean, I think it's something like 90% of the world's panels, come from China. And so there's long been a lot of trade disputes and arguments over both either dumping of those panels because they were claimed to be made too cheaply, and so domestic manufacturing couldn't keep up or couldn't price successfully. There's been a lot of just friction, shall we say, particularly in module manufacturing, and the fact that China has a dominant market piece of that. So you couple the pandemic with trade disputes, what they call WRO, which was a withhold release order as part of some of these tariffs and trade disputes with China. And then you had inflation, as we all see and we all live with today. You had a lot of very macro market factors that came and impacted very heavily on the solar space. So not only did those create challenges getting products into the country, but they created significant headwinds in terms of cost. So when we came into the San Juan Solar project, it was the end of 2021 going into 2022. We acquired the project from Photosol in the spring of 2022. And what had happened in between that time period is it was very difficult to get product in the country. Costs were rising. there were challenges on procuring labor, and not just modules, but across the board. And then one thing I've highlighted here, which is an ongoing issue, which came into effect in 2021, was this forced labor that was happening in a part of China, where a lot of sourcing of modules was happening. So as we've worked through that as an industry, obviously very critical for all parties in this industry to both comply with the UFLPA, but to ensure transparency in terms of sourcing materials, not just as an owner like D.E. Shaw, but for all the parties along the way. So there's been a lot of challenge and moving pieces people have had to deal with, which caused some delays in getting San Juan Solar online. Let's go to the next slide, please. So in addition to physical challenges and policy challenges, the financing environment was difficult as well. I won't spend too much time on here, but some of these things are positive, some are negative. With the IRA, the PTC, which you could never take on solar, that's the production tax credit, was always used for wind. And the solar community had always relied on the ITC, or the investment tax credit, one based on the value of the capital cost of a project, and getting a credit and taxes and trading that in the tax market, where PTC is based on the production of the facility. And depending on where it's sited, the PTC could have more or less value compared to the ITC. So there's new, that was a new issue that came in that had to be studied. Battery energy storage, prior to this, did not have the ability to capture the ITC. So the IRA brought that, to the table. So now battery energy storage is still expensive. It's still volatile, as you can see the graph to the right there, particularly as we start to ramp up and see more penetration in the market. There was a huge spike during COVID due to material constraints and just supply-demand mismatch. But that continues to be a challenge. We've seen costs come down, which is helpful, but it still is a bit volatile. I think no one's surprised, or everyone feels the pain of the rising interest rate environment. We've gone for an environment where we were at 0 to 2% on treasuries, and things that get priced off that, debt, tax equity, for a long time. And the pandemic hit, and now with the last year and a half and all the moves the Fed is doing to cool inflation, I think we're now in a 6 to 7% interest rate environment. So big impact there. And then I think I've already talked to some of the other pieces in terms of equipment procurement, working with just other hurdles on site, whether that be geotech and trying to get your costs in line of whether you have to drill or not, to manage the soil risk, and then working with the state and federal agencies on mining reclamation and other pieces to have all our permissions. Next slide, please. So that was a little bit of the, Photosol did a great job, getting the pieces and parts of the project. They won a PPA with PNM, amongst others. Several people won that in an effort to have all these projects online by end of 2022 to coincide with these replacement resources that were needed. All the things I enumerated before, and there's plenty more, essentially made 21 and 22 virtually impossible to deliver solar projects across the country, not just in New Mexico. So it was very, very difficult. As a result of that, PNM issued another RFP to basically sample the market and try to get these projects that had been stalled to get them in a place where they could be right-sized, I think is the best way of describing it. For folks like ourselves and other developers, owner-operators, to be able to successfully handle higher rates, higher equipment costs, delayed schedules, things of that nature. And so it was a very busy summer after we acquired the project, working with PNM. And what came out of that and the RFP process was we were able to reprice the project to a higher level. This was, worked with PNM through their process, and then ultimately had to go to the PRC to get their stamp of approval. We got that updated PPA signed and approved in October. And then along the way, we were trying to modify both the schedule and some key elements to line up with that PPA on the interconnection agreement. And so that was executed in November. So most of 2022 was picking up the project, working through all the pieces on the ground to make sure we had all the rights and permissions that we had, and then making sure the contracts, the interconnection and the commercial contract, the PPA, were in line. All of that was I'll show a slide at the end, just an immense number of people. I can't, I can't, it would take all day to thank everybody, but just an immense number of people that were involved in the process and helped get the project to where it is. The exciting part was in June May of 2023, we closed our financing, and then in June we were able to kick off construction in earnest. So after that, starting in 2017, ultimately a goal to match this up to replace power coming offline in 2022 that had all kinds of challenges. We went through a turbulent year in 2022, and then came out the other end, with a successful agreement, and now we have significant progress on the ground. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on here. We could take some Q&A. I'm not the battery expert, but I just want to spend a little bit of time here, just to explain like the value of adding batteries and why it's important to PNM and other utilities. Solar, as you can see, it's like a sine curve. And obviously when the sun comes up, your production starts to ramp up, and then the middle of the day, that's where you have your bell curve there at its peak, and then as the sun goes down, it declines, and then at night you don't have that. Wind tends to have a complementary curve here, where wind typically blows at night. In this case, we don't have wind at the site, but what battery energy storage can do is where you see gaps between the yellow and the blue, where supply and demand are not matched, the battery can fill in to supply that. So there's a couple things it does. It helps firm capacity. So the utility, in this case PNM, can have more reliable. They can rely more on like how they can dispatch the project to serve the load that they have for customers. They can shift. So if there's excess capacity and the peak of the day is farther out, so people get home from work and it's still hot, and they switch on air conditioning and the sun isn't shining as strong, they can call on the battery to help fill in those gaps as well. And then there's other ancillary services and things like that to help support voltage levels on the grid and things of that nature. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of battery energy storage. Just to give everyone a sense, the 200 megawatt project, I think there's 8 circuits. I think of them as like Christmas lights. So you have like 8 strings of Christmas lights. Those are all your panels and inverters. And then we have this big block of battery energy storage. And I think we have 200 and, don't quote me on this, but I want to say 220 containers. So these are roughly the size of shipping containers. And there's 3 components. There's the cooling, because batteries obviously create thermal energy when they're working. And then you have the control system, and then you have the battery cells themselves. So as I said, we have a 20-year agreement, 100 megawatt of storage at a 4-hour duration. So as part of the facility, all this is tied in. So both the solar and then the use of the battery, PNM can draw those 400 megawatt hours. Next slide, please. Okay. So economic benefits. We all know, this is one of the challenges with the energy transition, is these communities that have had coal facilities, gas facilities, what they have been, in this case, San Juan generating station, having a large number of people both working and the community relying on it, and the ecosystem of suppliers, service providers, et cetera. That's a big hole to fill. I think the Achilles heel of solar is we don't, it's not a plant. The solar plant style or type is not like a big coal plant where you need lots of technicians, you need operators, you need, lots of different people to operate the facility. Once solar is built, it's relatively autonomous. You need, handfuls of people, 3 to 5 people for a project of this scale that, is there to help operate it. So where we try to maximize the value is during the construction period, during the development period, working with lots of local, consultants and service providers to help us do the work, both from a study and from a construction perspective. So one of the things we've done over the last many years, and Photosol, helped move this forward was get what's called a IRB or industrial revenue bond, which essentially is a payment in lieu of taxes. So it's a way for the county to participate and help provide financing for the project that provides a stable revenue stream or income stream for the county. As this plant is a new citizen essentially of the county. I think the flip side of that Achilles heel on jobs. So I think during construction, we talk about anywhere between 200 and 300 jobs. So I think we got 250 on the slide here. Typically these projects take 12 to 16 months to build. So there is a significant influx during those periods where we try to hire local labor as much as possible. And then of course, folks are, living, working nearby or commuting in and spending money in the community. As I was saying, the flip side to that Achilles heel is that because we are relatively autonomous asset, there's not a burden on services. So we don't need to hire teachers and police, et cetera. And I think the one service that we're closely aligned and work closely with was the fire department, in particular on the battery side of things, to have a plan and a program to manage that. Yeah, I think that covers it. I think the other piece that was a benefit to the county is just as we go through the building permit process and providing fees for reviews, there's a material value that they receive, through that process that can be applied to county functions. Next slide, please. So if anyone hasn't been out to the site, I can make a pitch now. We are holding a groundbreaking ceremony next Thursday on the site. This is from a couple of weeks ago, I want to say maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago. And I think if you look at the lower left to try to orient folks, the lower left-hand picture, if you look straight, south, you can see on the upper right-hand corner, that's the San Juan generating plant. If you move to the left and then, on the other side of that knob or that mound, and you get into town, that's Kirtland and then into Farmington. So just from an orientation perspective, you can see those big poles. That's the 345 kV towers that we will string that wire to bring the power from the solar project down to San Juan Generating Station, roughly 7 miles to get down to that place. And where you see a lot of those cars parked, that's going to be where the substation gets built. So everything will get collected into that space and then stepped up and pulled down. So in the other pictures, you can just see the pile driving equipment that's out there. Solar projects are relatively straightforward. I think in this case, civil work is usually a decent chunk of it. In the west here, it's not too bad. Like it's pretty flat out in this area. So there wasn't a whole lot of grading or changing the landscape that was needed. We tried very hard to minimize the civil impact so we don't, change drainage patterns and flow patterns and erosion and sedimentation issues. But hopefully this gives you all a scale of you can see the little boxes in the upper right-hand corner. Those are module boxes. And so typically what they do is they'll lay out all of the steel piers you can see there, and then they lay out a grid map, and then they pound the posts in, and they lay all the modules out. And then the next step here, the next pictures I'm hoping to get will be the racking being assembled to those piers. And then once all the racking is assembled, they will start putting modules up. But typically it's done in sequence. So they'll work on a pod here. They'll lay it all out, get it pounded, but as things start to come in, they can basically start to fill in the project as they go. Next slide. Just a brief moment on this. Trying to develop a project like this just involves countless people that you need to work with all kinds of different obligations to their stakeholders, that we need to work with and come up with, satisfactory agreements that both work within the law and the regulations that are in place, both from a local, state, federal perspective in this case, because we have a nexus across all of those agencies, as well as the utility, the local community, all the landowners. I haven't talked much about them, but they help make this whole thing happen. We have 11 landowners for San Juan. And, without the landowners and having agreements that run, 30 plus years, we wouldn't have the foundation to put all these other pieces together. But you can just see that there's a myriad of folks that we work with through the process, and just appreciate obviously everyone's help and support as we work through this. Next slide, please. I'm getting close here because I want to leave time for questions. So here's the latest picture that I've got. So this is looking the other way. So this is if you're looking north toward the, you can see the range in the distance. That's on the Ute Mountain Ute tribal property. This project doesn't quite get to the property line there between the state and the tribe, but it's pretty close. So you can see this, if we went back to that original view, the stuff on the right, there was a big blob on the right, and then there was kind of a snaking piece on the left, and then it all tied down to the San Juan generating station. So this is the bulk of the project here in that blob. I'm just going to call it, sorry for the not very good technical term, but that's the main bulk of the project right there. So what did we learn? I mean, we could go into details, but I think the broad strokes are, any plan that you put together, you come up with a thesis, hey, this, there's good infrastructure here. It looks like the San Juan generating station, could be retired. I think in 2017, the ETA hadn't come out yet. PNM hadn't finalized its plan, but as developers, we're always trying to look in our crystal ball, and that was very helpful to get the kernel and the seed of this project. But I can't tell you, I would say every way that this project thought it was going to happen, didn't happen in the way it was thought. From a financial perspective, from a design perspective, pretty much everything you can think of is different than what it was at the beginning. So it's just part of the process, knowing that models are flawed and that they will be changed and they have to be changed, and you have to be dynamic and respond to the market, and you have to work with other partners, which brings me to the second point, which relationships matter. I think, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I think I would say one of the most important and critical pieces of trying to manage that stakeholder map that I pointed to on the previous slide. You're not going to get along with everybody, and not everyone has the same interests. But you have to kind of roll with it and work with people, meet them where they are, and then work through the constraints that you have. And some constraints are removable, some are more flexible. And I think it's just working with all the parties as you go through this to keep the end goal in mind, but really make sure that you build good relationships along the way. That third one, nothing's perfect. I'm a perfectionist, but you have to let go of that. I think I was taught early on, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. So good to strive for it, but because it does help you think and optimize and create the value. I think that's needed for all parties to make a project like this make sense. And then, this ages me a bit, but my favorite movies, Galaxy Quest, Never Give Up, Never Surrender. Next slide. So in closing here, and I want to open it the last 20 minutes for questions, is just, this is a really exciting opportunity. I know a lot of parties have been involved in the Four Corners region for decades and working on the energy transition and how to make equitable change. In this case, I love the iWest mission and that it's multiple technologies. There's not just one path that's going to get us there. In this case, it's solar and batteries. It makes sense geographically, geologically. Having infrastructure that's there that we can piggyback on makes it more affordable for the consumer and the customers. It makes it easier just from a study and getting into the grid. I think you want to pick places like this that already have had impacts, so we can either lessen future impacts or work with what's already there to transition these to new productive uses, which I think we're doing here and is very exciting. So what comes next? This is just, I don't think this is everybody, but I just tried to do like a brain dump of, a chunk of the parties involved in this process over the last 5 to 6 years, that we couldn't have done the project without their participation and help. So it truly does take a village to make something like this happen, and we're really privileged to be part of it. That's it. I can open it up for questions now.
Okay, thank you, Noah. That was fantastic. And I do see that we have, oh, here's a nice comment. You get 20 points for mentioning Galaxy Quest. So there you go. And there's a question from Mary Ewers at Los Alamos National Lab. She asked, how often do solar panels need to be cleaned of dust or sand, and what amount of labor and equipment is needed?
Yeah, that's a great question. My asset managers would give a better answer than me, but I think what we model here is approximately 1 wash a year. And, I think it takes a handful of technicians, that essentially go and bring a water truck and, go through and wash the panels. It can, I would say that's the plan. We monitor production very closely because that's really important to PNM to make sure they're getting the electricity we promised. But that at the end of the day, all the financing, all the revenue for the project that pays for everything is based on the output of the project. So, if we have a dustier year or we see production isn't living up to snuff, we may, add more washings to the mix.
Okay, and if other folks have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand or just unmute yourself and ask questions. I'm curious, Noah, if you have an idea of the impact on emissions that the solar project has.
Ooh, you would get me on that one. I should follow up. I had this in another slide. I want to say, shoot, I don't have the carbon offset because it's millions of tons, but I want to say it's the equivalent of like 250,000 homes that we power, something like that.
Okay, thank you. So there is a question. I think Dubé has his hand raised. Go ahead, Dubé.
Yeah, thanks again. So you're harnessing the interconnection advantages there, the infrastructure. There's another flip side that is there's also some infrastructure like there's a coal vent shaft on Westmoreland. Do you know, is there remediation going on there to sort of have a regional or this coal vent shaft? I'm asking you a question I should ask Westmoreland, but there's good infrastructure, there's also bad infrastructure. Are we doing anything about the bad infrastructure, the coal vent shaft, that the mines are not operating from Westmoreland? Do you know?
I don't have their full reclamation plan, but like we're impacting some of the property that's under reclamation with EMNRD and the OSM, which is the mining, natural resources, and then the Office of Surface Mining. I know that there's like a 10-year reclamation plan, for Westmoreland. I mean, PNM has their reclamation of the facility itself, but I honestly don't know what they're doing with the shafts, if those get filled, or exactly what the reclamation requirements. Sorry, next time I talk to my Westmoreland contact, I will ask.
Yeah, no, that'd be great if you can share with Rachel. I'd like to know. I mean, I think they generally eventually fill it with water. I mean, it's to block all methane emissions. But till then, it goes from active pumping to diffuser. So I'd like to know. Oh, we should know.
Yeah, agree.
Okay, there's another question from Justin. What ways might communities benefit from these projects since they require few people to operate and maintain? Perhaps income generated during power production or lower electricity costs?
Yeah, I think that, let me take the first one. I mean, I think the natural cycle that's happening in the market is just solar energy plus storage now is becoming fundamentally cheaper than coal. So I think the long run average is the reason PNM, I mean, there are these requirements from the ETA, and other environmental regulation, but like the big shift that's happened in the market really has been a fundamental shift in just the cost to both produce and supply materials for coal. So I do think the long run is for prices to, is for them to come down. So that's one benefit, long-term benefit to the grid, and that should get passed on to ratepayers. The operational period is, it's difficult. I hate to say it. I wish I had a better answer, but you have folks that help with vegetation management, sort of landscaping and environmental matters like that. Typically there's a local technician or two that, particularly here because they're a lot of trained professionals from the plant, that could help do troubleshooting at the substation or inverters, things like that where maintenance is required. I think those are the areas long term. So the big benefit really is the shorter term. I think in this part of the community, because we have a 400 megawatt interconnection agreement, we're actively looking for another 200 megawatts. I mean, PNM did put an RFP out in 2023 or the end of 22 into 2023. It was a second phase of that earlier one that the first project got. So we could do this again, and we could, at least extend, to take this project. It's going to finish in 2024, summer of 24. Can we then roll into the next project in 25 and 26? We're looking at other development opportunities in the region because there is a lot of capacity. I mean, 1,600 megawatts of coal coming offline. There's opportunity to put back, quite a bit of new generation there. So I think my focus is how can we do more projects so we can kind of keep that initial bump you get from the construction period going. But at some point, once it's all said and done, it really is just handfuls of people operational.
There's another question from Blake. Can you describe the insurance requirements you had to deal with in terms of hail, wind, or vandalism?
Good question. I did not mark that specifically on my slide, but I would say insurance costs are another reason prices have gone up. And this is not just for our industry, across the board. Insurance has just gotten more expensive, I think, in part due to climate change and some of these more intense environmental events, be it hail, be it hurricanes, not here. So I can't talk to the specific point on the insurance, but there is a small part of this project where we are in the FEMA floodplain. So we had to ensure that at a higher value, and we had to design that accordingly. So it was above those FEMA floodplain, elevations. So that's one piece. Hail, this site compared to ones in the Midwest, I have a project in Missouri where insurance is literally 3 to 5 times higher than it was a couple of years ago because of hail risk and convective storm concerns. I don't have that issue as much here. In terms of like wind and snow, we designed the project to manage, both of those. So insurance doesn't really play too much of a part to that as long as we're designing to the right spec.
Okay, next question is from Stephen. What is the course of action if the facility produces more energy than the grid can accept at a given moment?
That's a great question. So we, as part of our interconnection agreement, we have the rights to supply up to 400 megawatts. There are, as part of that agreement, the transmission provider, in this case PNM, they have the right to curtail the project if there's an emergency or a safety situation on the grid. So if for whatever reason there was some spike or some issue in the area that caused an unsafe operating provision or an event on the grid, and our project putting electricity or voltage, whatever it may be on the grid, would exacerbate that, the transmission operator has the right and the control. It's part of our control systems to shut the plant down. Beyond that, they do not. So it's interesting in this circumstance. Most projects you would typically have a 200 megawatt PPA, say, and then you'd have a 200 megawatt interconnection agreement. And so you would be contracted for the full amount of what you can put on the grid. And if you tried to put more on it, you would be in breach of the agreement. You would be curtailed. They would stop the flow of that electricity, per that agreement. Ours is different because we actually have this larger GIA. So before we subscribe to another project to put in for another 200, I think in this case, we would be able to put more onto the grid. But the way the project is designed is to meet that requirement. So I think if we had a really exceptionally sunny year, a really good production, we could put that additional energy on the grid as long as it wasn't in an emergency situation.
All right, next question is from Dan. Did the goals for this project include any type of temporary power storage?
See if I got that question right. So temporary, so let me know if I get this right. I'm not sure I totally get the question, but as we build this, we have to have secondary and backup power through the construction period. When you bring batteries out, if you put just like a battery in your phone or any other battery you have, Duracell, Energizer, sorry, totally blanked. Those are temperature dependent. So if it's really warm out, they degrade faster. If it's cooler, they do better. But as soon as you put a battery on the project site, like it immediately starts to degrade. So we do have backup temporary power that we plug those into. We work with the state, air emissions folks, to bring generators out there to be able to basically maintain the integrity of the equipment, and in particular the batteries in this case. But we also need some power for the substation until we get energized and we get power from the grid to be able to operate, all the equipment independently. Does that answer the question?
I'll let Dan respond through the chat, or he can go off mute if he has any follow-up questions. There's a question from Pam about local taxes. What local taxes does the project pay during operations?
Yeah, so I can't speak to a levy or a specific category that it goes to, but the IRB, or the industrial revenue bond that we signed with San Juan County, is for a fixed amount that the project pays to the county over the 30-year period. The first contract is with 20 years with PNM, but the IRB, I believe, is 30 years. So that money goes into a fund that the county has, and then the county has discretion as to how those funds get spent.
Okay, and we have a question from Mike. Could San Juan County become a leader in solar energy storage technology regionally and/or nationally? And can local communities contract directly with DESRI for power?
I wish we could contract directly. I've had that question a few times over the years. Unfortunately on that, so I'll take the second one first. that second point, um, particularly in this case, if you just think of everything in like a case, and that case, it's at 34.5 kV. I mean, it gets 1500 volts is what the voltage level is at the panel. So as the sun hits it, it turns it into DC current, and the current goes to the inverter, turns it to AC, and then all that gets collected at what we call medium voltage, which is 34.5 kV. When that gets to the substation, because of the way the agreements are, we're delivering energy to PNM at that 345 kV level. So that's transmission level voltage. And then from that point, once we get it to them, they could, I mean, more often than not, even at transmission level, electricity generally goes to like the nearest load sink. So, if there's a substation, a distribution station that's connected to those lines nearby in Farmington, most likely that energy is going locally first before it gets sent around the grid. But in terms of providing to somebody's house or business, we can't. The first part of that question is, I certainly hope so. I mean, working with the county has been great. I mean, we are working on a second phase. We're working on a number of different development opportunities in and around the first project in San Juan Generating Station. I mean, it's a competitive business, so we're not the only ones doing that. I do think one of the areas that because we bought the project and we're focused on all of this chaos, if you will, in 22, and just focused on execution to make sure we get this project financeable and be able to build it and deliver on our promise to PNM. We didn't, this is just myself talking here. I would like to focus more as we go forward on engaging, local community stakeholders. We've been in touch with San Juan Community College, the economic development, Four Corners Economic Development, others, San Juan Citizens Alliance. I think going forward, could it become a technological hub? I don't know, but I think we are certainly interested in engaging with the community and seeing how our work here can help, bring opportunities to the colleges and local businesses. If people have ideas, we're certainly welcome to think about that. And I think from a work perspective, the current project is we're halfway done with construction, so I think that ship has sailed, but we do plan to be building other projects. So, Andrea, you can certainly have get a list of folks, or have folks reach out to me, and happy to connect.
Okay, there's a couple more questions. One of them is from Chris. What is the decommissioning plan for the project, and how many acres are covered with solar panels?
Yeah, I think we have site control of something like 11 to 1200 acres, and that includes the Gentai. I think the actual fenced acreage of the panels is closer to 8 to 900 acres. In terms of decommissioning, so we do a decommissioning report or study that looks at what's required at the end of life of the facility, and that generally comprises of taking two things can happen. So we don't know, 20, 30 years out, these have a 35-year life is what the design life is today. We think they'll get recontracted in 20 years. All the infrastructure is there. But if we get to a place where, all the contracts are over and we need to pull stuff out of the ground, we're responsible for pulling the fencing, the posts, basically anything that's above the surface. Typically if there's buried wires and things like that, there's provisions in there. These can be negotiated. But get left in subsurface as long as they don't present any sort of hazard or environmental concern. And then I think the growing chorus that's out there, Europe is farther ahead of us than we are in every respect for recycling, but is looking at how you recycle the components of these projects.
Okay, well, Noah, I know we're coming up on the hour. There are a few more questions in the chat. Do you have time, or do you prefer that I email them to you?
I'm happy. Give me 1 second. I do have a call at 2, but I'm going to just push it a little bit. So give me one moment. Bear with me. Okay.
Okay.
Push that up. Go ahead.
So questions from Chloe. Are you considering any type of thermal energy storage or thermochemical energy storage for this or other projects, or eyeing any in the development technology? I'm sorry, or eyeing any in development technology?
Good question. I think we are, my battery expert, who's not with me, I think the most readily available commercial products right now are lithium, some sort of lithium-based battery. So the battery for San Juan Solar 1 is lithium. I think what we're thinking about for the second phase would be similar. I know we have looked at, some of the fluid, and I'm going to quickly get out of my depth here. Flow batteries, that's what I was looking for. So I know there's definitely views and we're studying what long duration batteries look like and what technologies make sense. I mean, I think there's like some nickel and iron solutions. There's people talking about solid state batteries, but I think the reality we see in being able to execute on a project like this near term is lithium. Lithium ion, I think predominantly, and there's combinations of chemistries, is the main one we go to, mostly because we finance all of our projects. These are big capital investments, and so we have to rely on commercial technologies that banks will be willing to underwrite.
Great. And final question is from Andrew. Did you consider producing green hydrogen for the San Juan generating station via renewable electrolysis, similar to what's occurring at the Intermountain power plant in Delta, Utah, in order to prolong the life of the installed investment of the power plant?
That is a great question. We did not. I think at least the nature of the way this project came to us, and then what we've done taking it forward is it was originally intended and bid in 2020 as a solar and storage project. I think when we picked it up, I think there have been some discussions about green hydrogen. I don't know that it's something that PNM was specifically seeking, but we did not really look or entertain that concept here, mostly because we bought the asset, midway through its life, and the focus was how do we pick this up and repackage it essentially so we can build it and get it online for PNM, ahead of next summer. So that's been the focus. But future iterations, I know hydrogen is a hot topic and it is something we look at, but nothing is on the drawing board here right now.
Great. Well, Noah, I just want to thank you for giving this seminar and for taking a few extra minutes with us to answer questions. If anyone has additional questions they want to ask, they can submit it to iwest@lanl.gov. And I also want to remind everyone about our upcoming seminar on Wednesday with Sonrisa Lucero and Deborah Sunter from DOE Office of Economic Impact and Diversity. They'll be talking about community benefit plans, why DOE is requiring them, and how tips for how to write an effective plan. So please plan to join us. And with that, I'll thank you again, Noah, and see you all next time.
Thanks for your time.